had like a network marketing company for a while. So I did that for a minute. I actually got introduced to the business by Jordan. So Jordan Valdez, so I'm sorry, Zach's assistant. So that's kind of heard of the whole business. And that was actually during the COVID time. So, back then, like working out in the garage and she was, cause I'm, really good friends with her fiance. Him and I are actually we're business partners. And so she basically, was kind of like laughing one day and I was like, oh my God, what's going on? She's like, hey, this guy, like some dude like made 33 grand. I'm like, oh, cool. How much does he keep? She's like, well, you get 75% of cash advance of that. And I was like, holy smokes. Like I'm in the wrong business. You know what I mean? So that was kind of my initial introduction to the business. But yeah, man, I mean, straight from Verizon to here.
Yeah, and you performed pretty well at Verizon and were
Oh,
having like solid income,
yeah.
stable job. So I guess what was I mean, obviously having that crazy example of like some guy, selling 30 and picking up 75%, but when you're doing well and then you start hearing this crazy stuff, you're like, yeah, well, probably like mediumly true. So what had you go, okay, like I need to figure out what this thing is all about and then make a decision from there? Like what prompted you to actually make the
Yeah.
move?
I would say, I mean, realistically, it was like I was pretty stagnant. I mean, as you mentioned, right? Yes, I was a top producer at Verizon. I was a top 1% producer. So the last 7 years I was there, I was always number 1, 2, or 3 year to date for our Colorado, Utah market. That's roughly out of 150 reps. But also as a sales manager. So I became a sales manager, district manager, had a lot more responsibilities, but I was still, doing really well on the sales side of things. So income was fine. Always made six figures. I mean, there's never a year that I made less than six figures. But the thing is I was pretty stagnant and capped to where I was. So I mean, I think just like kind of anybody who has like a growth mindset and really want to progress in life. I mean, there comes a point in time where making 150 grand a year is really like, I mean, I don't know. It's just I was stagnant. So I was like, man, like what am I going to do? And at the time, funny enough, it was kind of between real estate or life insurance. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna do one of these like full tilt. Like I need, my goal of mine was to be a millionaire before the time I'm 30. So time's ticking on that. Anyway, so I was chatting with a buddy of mine. He's a successful real estate guy. If I named him, I'm sure a lot of people here would know him. But he did like the Real AF podcast on Andy Frisella. I mean, dude's like he's on it. You know what I mean? Ryan Pineda show, the whole works. But basically, he was like, "Hey, Chris, like you could definitely do the real estate. You could join my brokerage, but you're probably not going to get paid for 6 months. So I would recommend you sell your house and do that." He's like, dude, have you ever looked into selling life insurance? Coming from the real estate guy, and I was like, well, I'm like, yeah, no, actually, I have. He's like, dude, he's like, you need to, why don't you do that? Like, the turnarounds are going to be a lot quicker. And he's like, dude, I know many millionaires into the life insurance business. So I'm like, yeah, I remember hearing about it. I need to do something with it. And that's kind of like when the switch was going on where I'm like, man, like, I just need to figure this shit out. I need to. So that's when I've always known about FFL. I was even enrolled in the course, man, 4 years ago, and I never finished it. So that's where I was like, no, I actually got to do it. One of my buddies, Austin, he's a licensed broker and everything, and I'm like, all right, like I need to come around. So I kind of found the Denver office, and I mean got connected to Ty, and kind of the rest was history from there. So.
I think it's awesome that you enrolled for your course. 4 years even beats my personal record of 15 months, but kind of the same thing. Like, hey, I'm gonna get in. This is gonna be the time I'm gonna change my life, and then like over a year goes by.
Yeah.
So this is why when you bring people into the business that don't pass their test right away, don't be a dickhead to them because you could lose Chris, and then you're gonna be like, oh man, I really wish I wouldn't have been rude because who knows who you would have lost. So I would not want to be mean to Chris anyway because he's enormous. But even if you were small, you're a hammer. So you don't risk losing good people out of pride. So, okay, so 4 years, we're locked and loaded. You're in the Denver office.
Yeah.
How was your first like couple of months? I mean, was it the concepts relatively simple? How did that go when you were kind of like learning all the jargon and stuff here?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it went really well. I mean, the main thing, I mean, with learning any type of skill, right? Obviously, you got to be super coachable. So the great thing is like me being in the office. Obviously, I was around people who were selling a lot, right? I mean, obviously, like Brian, yourself, Ty, I mean, Jesse, like all these guys. So I just kind of really was emulating more or less their schedule and like plug into the training. So in the office, of course, we have a 1 p.m. training, but we also have an 8 a.m. training. So, plugging into both of those and just learning as much as I can about insurance, going outside of work and just learning about insurance. I mean, eat, live, sleep, and die and breathe insurance. You know what I mean? So it went pretty well. I mean, it was everything that I could hope for and honestly more. So that's also why I put a lot of time on the front end. But yeah, I mean, definitely had a good amount of like failures of like, oh shit, like, is this going to work out? Is this, going to be, the thing? But honestly, at the end of the day, like I saw the results in the office and I'm like, no, like it's, if someone else can make it, I can make it. It's just a matter of time. Right. So, I mean, it was just, yeah, it was a lot of failure at the beginning, but I mean, at the end of the day, it was just all growing and learning. So it was pretty good.
Yeah, which I think that's the hardest transition is when you're already kind of an elite level salesperson and now you're stepping into a unfamiliar sales role. Dude, if you don't disconnect this, like I already know how to sell stuff. I just need to, I just need to like get in front of people, whatever others say. Try not to be like overwhelmingly rude, but the coachability piece is literally what almost swallowed me in the business because I came in overconfident. I've sold stuff before. I'm great with people. This will probably be easy, which is why it took me a lot longer than it took you to like have this understanding of, oh, just because you've sold something and are good at what you did prior, I didn't realize that that was this. And you're like, oh, it's not this. So I will be coachable and then get better faster, which I would say you did very well. Um,
Yeah.
so you're picking it up. How did you start? And then I want to get in some like skill set of like how do you go top down on your sales stuff? But I want to just have you touch really quick on bringing so many people into the business like so quickly.
Yeah.
Because that was greatest fear number one is like being brand new. And it's like, I have to become this elite level performer before I ever talk to anybody about coming in because, I'm responsible for them. And you didn't take that route. You just kind of like let the quote unquote system do its thing and like bring people in right away. So can you kind of just like run us
Yeah.
through why you thought like that and why you started pouring people in?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and just kind of for instance, I mean, I was kind of doing some math and looking at everybody. So we've had about since I started. I mean, right off the bat, I think I hired like 8 guys from Verizon. Roughly, it was like 8 guys. So I mean, my whole thoughts with everything at the time was like, listen, like at the end of the day, I'm just learning. I'm just learning. The great thing, and I mean, even Jay Mascot, he talks about this. Like when you bring someone into the business, or if someone comes on, like, dude, it's just going to accelerate your learning curve. So at the end of the day, like when they're asking me questions, I'm like, shit, I don't know. Let me find out. Then I just accelerated my learning curve a lot quicker. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, too, like I'm not selfish. Like shit, dude. Like especially kind of like what this opportunity has already done for me in such a short time frame. Like I'd be ridiculous and kind of messed up in a sense if I wasn't like willing to extend that hand out to others, even people maybe I don't know. I mean, shoot, I mean, there was an example of even just kind of today where a guy, he kind of came in, everything else, like I didn't know him though, but then his first day is today. But like, if I just didn't extend a hand, be like, hey man, like, let me see if I connect you to let's see if it's a good fit. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, man, like, I don't think I'm better than anybody. Like I think anybody should be given an opportunity if they're truly hungry and like ready for it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I mean, at the end of the day, like it just gave me a lot of different like learning opportunities to where people are asking me questions. I'm learning. I mean, it's always going to be a good thing. So it was never bad for me.
Dude, I will pretty much die on the hill of if any specific individual is willing to like show up, be coachable, and put in the work and do the skill set stuff, you're not trying to make an all pro like NBA team, dude. We're just learning how to say 3 paragraphs in this exact order, and then
Yeah,
be present and care, which some of the caring stuff, like some of us have to like work on that a little bit when we're new, understanding that this is an emotional sale. But if you literally show up and be as coachable as you and like just listen without ego, um, I think that anybody can turn themselves into being a 30, 40, and 50K producer. Like I legitimately believe that if you work hard enough with a good attitude that you can get that done. Um, Thought that since I literally started because as you've seen, it's a huge difference between like I'm going to show up with a good attitude and work really hard and, listen versus you're going to show up, not listen, make excuses, have a bad attitude. Like that you're doing the same things from like, hey, I'm in office at 8, I'm in office at 8. But if Chris is like fired up to learn, wants to know how he can get better versus like all of these leads suck and everybody sucks, like, dude, you're going to have a significantly different career. So I think that is the other piece that you put together really well, is didn't let good or not so good days become a distraction to like what you were still here to do and learn, which is why you went to 30K so quick. Not that many people do that. So
I mean, and too with that, like, at the end of the day too, I mean, there's good days and there's days that you learn. Like, I truly believe that, man. Like, I've got, like, the last year was a pretty difficult year for me from like a financial, emotional, whatever, spiritual level. So like, already kind of going through a lot of shit too in the beginning from like last year, dude. I mean, this is amazing, dude. I mean, we get to sell insurance, we get to get paid pretty dang well for it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like we're learning, we're growing, we're developing. And as long as there's not any stagnancy, and when it comes to like the effort and the growing part of like, okay, like, am I practicing my script? Am I getting in front of clients? Like, if somebody doesn't buy today, but I did, X amount of calls or reach outs through presentations, it's all good. Like, like, you just got to stay consistent with the discipline behind all that, which I would say was something that, thank the Lord, I was never like never really had a super tough time with, maybe because of how I was raised. It's just the discipline behind things of like, hey, if like you're going to do something, like, you do it, you stay, true to your word. Like, you follow like a good routine, you follow a good work ethic, and then, you plug yourself into the system. I mean, just follow kind of like what the guys who are successful are doing. I mean, dude, obviously you seem like you have a pretty crazy schedule. You have a crazy routine that, I don't even want to emulate, but like, it's a pretty like good thing to look up to, right? It's like, wake up 3 a.m., cold plunge, work out, listen to some good stuff, good podcasts, read, pray, go to work, help some, serve some families. Like, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. Like, if you have all that, like, dialed in with the discipline side of things, man, it's all going to pan out.
dude, could not possibly agree more. I love that. So, all right, so let's go skill set stuff. Because yes, this was a new sale. Yes, you sold some stuff before. What was the biggest difference before we start that on the sales process? Like, what was the biggest thing from like, you probably need this extra case in case you fall into an ocean versus, like this, I don't know if that's what you really did, but versus like this type of sale.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was, so I was always so used to upselling. That was my biggest thing, was always upselling. Like, hey, how? Because at Verizon, we were compensated based on how many devices we could add to an account. So I was like the king of upselling, of like, all right, you're coming here for a phone, or you're going to leave with half the store. Like, that was just my job. That's what I got good at. That's what I practice at. Now with this, it's like, yes, you can upsell. By the end of the day, we want to make sure like the client's being served the most. And I think that's the really cool thing with this, is like, at the end of the day, we just want to make sure like whatever client or we have, we just, fit a product that's good for them. So yeah, I would say that was the biggest thing, is switching from like upselling almost to downselling in a sense, make sure the business is sticky, make sure it's actually what the client wants, needs, desires. I would say that was the biggest thing. And then obviously we're doing this virtual. Everything I did was in person. So the wife objections, all that stuff, it was just handled a little bit different on the front end.
Yeah, how was going from a face-to-face career? Because I know there's a handful of us that went through that here. How was that adjustment window for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely different. And I would say one of the biggest things now is obviously the client hears us and sees us through our voice now. So everything that I say is very calculated with the client. The way I say it, the pacing, I'm super dialed in. Like, when I'm talking to somebody, back then it was very much like, hey, I'm an expert, we're going to serve you the best. Like, you take advantage of these offers. And, obviously, just talking small talk with them, and, obviously looking professional. I mean, dude, I'm in a tank top, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not, so like, it's completely different. Now it's just, a lot of things with, just voice stuff, just pacing, your tone, all that stuff now.
Yeah, pace, pitch, verbiage, I think is huge with what we do. And the pattern recognition, I think, is the hardest thing for someone that's brand new, just because you don't have those reps of like, hey, if you say something and a client reacts in a certain way, you may not hear that in the beginning. So you may not adjust your pace, or you may just move on without following with the question. So if you can have like this control and a pattern on repeat, like your process is probably to a degree, like almost identical on every single appointment. Like we have the same exact thing that we're going to run top down through. And that's really what I want to get into next is your process and maybe some verbiage adjustments that help you,
Mm-hmm.
from I don't even really know what term insurance is to like cranking.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first and foremost, like the biggest thing that I always kind of go back to is just the script. So obviously the script that, that Ty put together, some of the guys in the office, literally I remember my first day, we're going through the script. I grabbed some new guy that was with in my class, grabbed him. I'm like, hey dude, like we're going to practice, we're going to run through this like 10 different times. Like we're just going to, practice the intro, the why, the structure, and just go through that. Like, shoot, I mean, we went through it until, training was like over an hour, but really just dialing in the script side of things, I think that's really big. And especially just that initial intro for me is huge. Cause obviously that intro, we're going to say more times than not that's going to be the thing that we say the most throughout any call, right? Is if we get hanged up on, if whatever objection comes on, that intro is going to be huge for us. So that's like where I really like dialed that in first and kind of, followed suit with the next things. So just the initial intro.
So intro was where you spent a ton of time early training
Absolutely.
that piece of repetition.
Yeah.
So you master the intro, you're doing the role plays, trying to keep working on that on a daily basis. And then can you go through kind of your steps like, hey, I've agreed to stay on the phone with you, Chris. Yes, this is my information. How do you bring me into a full appointment?
Okay. Yeah, for sure. So first and foremost, I mean, like let's say we did the intro. I said, hey, Easton. You said, yeah. I'm like, hey, this is Chris. Just getting back to you about that form that you submitted. Force pause. For the life insurance you listed your beneficiary as Wanda. Is that correct? They're going to say yes. I'm like, all right, great, Easton. Now, are you looking at coverage on just yourself or another family member as well? Then you'll tell me, you give me a direction. Just yourself. Cool. All right, Easton, understood. Now, are you like most of my clients I talk to, just trying to cover funeral final expenses, or what's the goal? And I kind of leave that up there because at the end of the day, that goal, whatever it is, it could be funeral expense, could be they want to pay off Chevy Tahoe, I don't know what it is. That's going to be their selling point. So as soon as somebody tells me, like for example, Easton, like let's say I was asking you, just trying to cover the funeral final expenses, or what's the goal? And you're just going to say whatever. Like,
How about some of the house? Let's knock down some of the house.
The house. Totally understood, Easton. So you just want to make sure that the mortgage is all taken care of, that burden doesn't fall back on your wife Wanda.
Correct.
Okay, understood. So now we're all on the same page. I reaffirmed, I re-backed up everything that you said. You said that's exactly what you want. I mirrored it. Now I'm gonna take you into the structure. So I'll say, all right, Easton, well, mortgage protection, it's all based on your age and health. So I'm gonna go over a few quick questions regarding your age and health, and also some details about the mortgage. From there, we're going to go ahead and shop all the major carriers in the United States to find you the best plan. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. And Easton, from there, of course, once we customize it to your budget, we'll just submit a quick request for coverage. That way, one is taken care of in the event that you pass. Something along those lines. They'll say yes, and then I'll go straight into suitability from there. Because that understanding, I gave them my structure. Hey, we're going to send a request for coverage. We're going to submit an application. We're going to make sure that wife, whoever the beneficiary is, taken care of.
So I'm going to throw this in here. So we have intro on the same page, identify information listed, they confirm. Then you're going to go, okay, so now we need a direction. And you go, is it like, are you like most? So assumptive, love that. Are you like most of my clients, which again, most of my clients, which means I have a lot of them. So, it's a hidden intentionality behind what you're saying. So are you like most, funeral or something else? And then whether they are like, yes, funeral or something else, like, okay, what is that something else? And
exactly.
then we establish like our why. So why and direction are basically like intertwined because that's where we're going to take the appointment. And then following that is going to be your structure of making sure that clients are on the same page. Like, this is what we're doing. This is how my job works. And we're going to do it like this so that Chris, something happens to you, sweet Wanda's not outside sleeping.
Exactly.
Or whatever version of that would be. So,
exactly.
And that's on repeat always. Intro,
Always.
section /why, you set the structure. Now, I would say at that point, we're relatively confident that like, hey, we've had these agreements. I have all this ammunition. Like you told me this stuff. So we should be paced for reasonable amount of those people to close if we get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is there something during your suitability that you're looking out for? If they like tell you this stuff and then you start getting pushback throughout the rest of the appointment, how do you kind of finalize, I guess, and get to the rest of your appointments?
Yeah, I mean, really with suitability, I mean, the health side of suitability is always to be used as ammunition. So, for example, I mean, let's say client said they had a heart attack, and towards the end of the close, I go into the close of, hey, between which one of these options fits best for you and your wife, or should we adjust? If I ever get a lot of pushback or anything like that, I'm like, hey, well, Easton, I mean, listen, this is the most likely that's going to the best chances of getting approved. Now, of course, with that heart attack that you had a year ago, that could be a little difficult. So we just want to make sure that we have something instead of nothing. That way, your wife Wanda's protected, right? So I'm always like with the suitability, if they have any like health stuff, I could always go back to that later, like petting, like, hey, at the end of the day, we're not even sure if we're going to get approved. So going back to that suitability, those are some of the things I'll use in suitability to help close a deal.
And I've heard you do the health close, and you can do it on the other side too. I think you do both. It's been a while since I heard your other one where they're like in perfect health, but it would be basically the same concept. Hey, while you're still young and healthy,
Exactly.
you have a health change, and this is not an option. Like
Mhm.
you're never going to be healthier than you are today. Like you're going to be a day older, and a day in worse health, like a day closer to your last day tomorrow. So like
Exactly.
the best that it's ever going to be. So I'm like 99% sure that it was you that I heard do that on the other side too, where you have like, hey, because of you've had this crazy heart attack, like we do need to find something instead of nothing, even if it's not in their mind like the dream plan. Like
Yeah.
the worst case scenario is they die with nothing. So
Mhm.
I think that's where like you have to be intentional, and it is a little bit emotional and definitely uncomfortable your first couple of times having that conversation. But
Yeah.
again, like, this is real stuff that people maybe don't want to talk about because it is uncomfortable.
Mhm.
But if you don't have that conversation with them, then they get into this permanent, I'm never making a decision. That's a universal loss because they don't have insurance, their beneficiaries pay the price, and then we don't do a good job, which means we don't get paid. So like those are all bad solutions.
Exactly. And two, I mean, even with all that, I mean, like using their health like that could be used to help close the deal. But I mean, you always like for myself, I'll always say like, hey, at the end of the day, like insurance, life insurance, you can't just buy it off the shelf. You do have to get approved for it, Easton. So at the end of the day, we still send it for approval. Like so if they say I gotta think about it, there's this, that. Hey man, like listen, or like, hey, I'm not committed to anything. Hey, neither are we. At the end of the day, the insurance company still has to, approve you. Now, of course, due to that stroke that you had a year ago, I could keep our chances. That could be a little tough. Easton, of course, I want to make sure that you and Juan are taken care of. So what we could do, we could start at the bare minimum and then adjust if needed, whatever. So something along those lines.
Yeah, that bare minimum close I think is huge because getting them out of this mindset of like, well, if I can't get 50 or I can't afford to get 50 or I'm not eligible, like then I'm better off having nothing, which is a pretty
Yeah.
insane thing to think that,
Well,
well, instead of 10, they'll be better off with zero. Like, in what plausible world is that a thing? So, having that conversation respectfully is
exactly.
also very important. Um, and I think that you come from, Chris, a good place of like, dude, I'm asking you these hard questions because it's important and there's massive consequence without it. Was that part because it's a different close sale than
Mhm.
for years? Was that like uncomfort? Was that something that you were just like, hey, I'm just going to embrace it early, or we were like pushing back about, I don't know
Yeah.
if I'm gonna be blunt yet because that's really awkward at first.
I think it kind of came in a phase. So of course, in the beginning, yeah, it could definitely be uncomfortable because you're like, shit, man. Like, it is a little nerve wracking per se. But two, if you actually care, it's really not because so I would say that's probably something that really changed from when I was new. I was always like so worried, like, oh my gosh, like, like hopefully they can afford this. Maybe they buy, maybe they don't. But then now it's just like, dude, I actually like care. You know what I mean? So I do want there to be some in place. I actually do kind of care about Wanda. At this point, he may have told me like kind of his whole situation, kind of like everything that is set up. He's like, man, I have nothing in place. He's like, dude, like if I don't have this, Wanda screwed, whatever. Then I'm like, hey, man, like at the end of the day, dude, I'm not doing my job properly. If one, if you can't afford it, but two, if you don't have, something instead of nothing. So kind of using that too, and I swear that comes off in the tone as well. Like when you really care and like, you're not just like looking out for your own pockets, you're looking, for their concerns as well. That's where it'll kind of come together. And I would say that more or less came from my own personal life experience too. Of like in the beginning, like I said, when I first started, kind of new, green, whatever, kind of nervous to say those things. But then too, I was like thinking about, I'm like, man, when my baby cousin passed away, dude, like that put our whole family through a bind. And if we had something, that we would have been good. You know what I'm saying? But obviously, then I use that experience as well, that story. But like, hey, baby cousin passed away. We actually buried him when he turned 1 years old. Obviously, we had zero coverage at the time. So like, this is always a priority for me, and so it should also be for you too, and your kids or whatever. So I would say like that comes off pretty dang well, and I'll use that story a lot of times as well to you know just really to get out of their own way at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent and fan of sharing something that some would deem as maybe a little over personal. But it's a real experience. Like I went through this exact thing. Like this happened to me.
Yeah,
My friends, got sick or got in car accidents. Like everybody is that's basically like between 15 and 20 or older has usually lost somebody close. Like almost everybody. And young people. So like dude, at 68, you just can't tell me confidently like there's no chance that you're gone tomorrow. Like I
yeah,
know teens and kids. So sharing those kind of personal examples, I think helped me a lot. Like get into like, dude, this is something that may require a trust build with our clients because it's an emotional sale, an emotional purchase for them. So I'm not here to try to make sure that you can't pay your mortgage because your insurance bill is so high. I'm here to make sure that she can when you're not here. And
mm,
here's why.
yeah,
I love that, and I don't think it's like oh, I'm getting an angle. Like it's real shit, dude. It's
yeah. It's
really
real.
what happened.
Yeah,
So I like that you bring in some like personal life experience and emotion to the client, so they know that oh, Chris is actually a regular dude who has a real life that has had some experiences. I'm a big fan of that, dude. That's great.
yeah, and it's just the relatability factor. I think when there's that commonality, like with a client. I mean, it's one. It's obviously yes, it's easier to close, but then there's that trust factor that's built in. There's just you just take it to a different level. Then too, like also like I got insurance from my parents, right? My my grandparents, all that stuff too. So like when I also tell clients like, hey, this is actually the same type of plan I set up my parents on, like dude, like it's true. So it's like also there's just like more yeah, there's more trust built in there. I mean, listen, this whole life plan, same thing I set up my parents on. So yeah, it's a lot easier. I have that common ground, then typically they'll buy. So
Yeah, relatable. And I'm doing the same thing for you that I would do my own family, and actually that I literally did for my own family. So I love that. Okay, so pretty straightforward stuff. Little intro, little direction and why, set a little structure. Suitability stuff kind of is what it is. Like this is what you match with health wise, price wise. Um, Presenting, I think you're just looking for affordable options to present. Like
yeah,
that's kind of like a be smart thing. Um, I'm a large proponent of income. I know it's not for everybody, but I think having a base understanding of their month to month has helped me. Is there any other stuff that you are like, hey, this is something that I added or changed or do all the time that we didn't touch on that you want to share?
I mean, yeah, you kind of mentioned the income side of things. I mean, recently I've always been asking like, hey, like, are you working or retired, disabled? So retired, disabled, fixed income. So anytime I'm explaining a whole life plan, I explain that the premium's fixed. I always touch on their income. I'm like, hey, and of course, Houston, since, or I'll say then also the whole life plan, it is a fixed rate, a fixed premium, especially you being on disability and whatever, and you have your VA. We want to make sure it fits the budget every single month. It'll never increase on you. Does that make sense? It's not like those plans that increase on you every 5 years. Does that make sense? And I get that commonality. So I would say there's definitely certain things that I'll touch on. So like with working or yeah, I mean, if I mentions a fixed premium and of course, let's say they're working, but of course, Easton, everything's going great right now, right? But we also want to make sure it also fits the budget during retirement as well. Because that looks like about 3 years away. Is that when you're planning on retiring? Yes. Okay. Whatever. So then they just know I'm looking at more for them as well.
Yeah, which again, that'll add a big chunk of trust. Like, hey, this if it's good now, but you retire in 3 years, I'm sure you're like most, and you'll take like a small hit to your month to month when you retire. Fair? Yes. Okay, cool. So let's keep that in mind when we're setting up your long-term fixed cost plan, because you can't retire and go, hey, would you mind slinging that down about 100 a month because I'm retired now? Like you can't, it doesn't work like that with what we do. So that longer vision, even if you're like, oh, I think I could have closed for 250 and we settled on 125, but now that stays forever. Good for client, good for business. It's a universal win. So I like that a lot. We've got a handful of minutes left, Chris. So if you guys want to unmute, which I'm pretty sure you have that ability to, yes. If you're cool, Chris, maybe if you guys have a couple of questions or like, hey, how do you get through this objection, or just something that he deals with regularly, you guys can unmute and ask a couple things. And if not, well, I'm going to give it like 60 to 120 seconds here.
Sounds good.
If nobody has any questions, then we will wrap up.
I would say there's one thing that, you know, that even a few people have asked me like in the office is just when it comes to like building a team. Like, I've definitely gotten that question quite a bit. Just for instance, like right now we have 12 active agents full time. There's over 17 people in the course currently that are actively like saying like, "Hey, I'm down to do this. Like, let me get this done." I mean, there's way more than that. Obviously, that I've sent it out. Roughly, we've hired around like 18 agents. You know, 6 didn't make it. Whatever. Um, I've gotten a lot of questions around that, so I do want to touch on that. I would say like one thing that is really good, just if somebody does want to build a team, is first and foremost, like Easton, like everybody knows what I'm doing. Like everybody and their mom knows what I'm doing. So like that comes to, like the Instagram stuff, social media. I'm not like necessarily blasting insurance all the time. I mean, obviously I show a lot of like personal stuff as well, but I also show like my development, kind of like what I've done. Right. From like the steps of, I remember like my first, it was like my first week and I posted it up. I'm like, hey man, like this is what I'm doing, selling life insurance. And it's never in like a recruiting way to where I'm like, hey, like I want people to come like do my thing, or like, hey, like DM me how to get involved. Like I personally don't do that because then you turn into the chaser. I don't want to be the chaser. I don't, I want, people have always came to me. I've probably had easily 50 to maybe 100, like 50, like I'd say like 75 or so people. Like reach out like, hey man, like how can I get involved, or hey, like what are you up to now, all that stuff, just asking questions. That who knows, I mean, obviously we stay consistent with that, eventually people will continue to like reach out and whatnot on that. One quick thing with that too, I would say like I'm very intentional as well, like when I'm out and about. Like if I meet a new person, so first and foremost, I also did network marketing, but I was also in sales. So like I get to strike a conversation with anybody. It'd be the easiest thing. If someone's wearing some shoes I like, I'm like, hey man, I like your shoes. Where'd you get them? Blah, blah. Oh man, do you use those for lifting? Whatever. Oh, you lift too. Cool. Like, do you typically work before work or after work? Oh, I lift before. Oh, sweet. What do you do for work? Like, then they're going to ask me naturally. So I would say I'm super intentional with any conversation I have outside of the office. Like it's like everybody's going to know that I sell insurance. It's kind of my take on things. And obviously when salespeople, when I meet salespeople, I'm like, oh, dude, sick. Like, what are you making? And then obviously they'll tell me. Then I'll share what what we're doing here, or what some of the guys do in the office, and that always becomes like kind of a topic of conversation, I would say. So that's always been something that I've noticed. Like people will like ask or kind of wonder how that works, but yeah.
Well, dude, what's funny is you're basically repeating something that Sean talks about all the time, the head cheese. And it's be interested, not interesting, and people will be interested in you.
Yeah.
Some version of that is probably not exactly 100% accurate, but the whole concept is exactly what you're saying. Like you don't walk up to someone like, dude, you see how jacked I am? I've obviously been lifting for a long time. What do you do for work? Because I do insurance. But now it's weird for everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're like, dude, those are sick shoes. Where did you get them? And then now it creates this conversation of like, you're interested in that person. Like, oh, sweet. Tell me what time do you go? Why did you pick that time? Oh, do you go before or after work? And now you are just like rapid firing interest.
Mhm.
And the default response, for most, I guess, maybe they'll just be like, oh, I'm obviously super awesome and walk away. But for most, they'll be like, well, what do you do for work anyway? And like, oh, I do this. And then it creates a conversation, which
Exactly.
that is a learned skill. It's sometimes if you've never done that before, it is hard to be interested
Mhm.
in somebody else if you don't know what to be interested about. Like,
Well, I
don't
would
have,
say that's you got to be genuine too, right? You can't just be like, "Hey, miss, I like your purse." Like, no, that's just weird. I don't give a shit about purses, obviously, but I'm just like, at
get
the end of the
peppered.
day, it has to be real, right? So like, I don't know, and that message drop, if you will, that's what I call it, is like a message drop of like, oh yeah, I saw life insurance. Pretty neat. We have this brokerage that's running. We just actually signed a contract on a new office. Like we're actually moving to this office here next month. 10,000 square feet, blah, blah. I'm super excited they see that. They're like, oh man, like that's crazy. I was, then people that'll just take the conversation to kind of a different level.
Dude, here's a little side quest tip. This process works on Instagram. If you start following, A and B players or people in a similar field that you want to recruit to, just respond to watching their stuff and ask questions instead of like going, hey, you seem super sharp, Chris. What are you doing for work? I'm always looking for high level reps to be on my team. Like, I'd rather jump off a building than respond to you, to be honest. But if like I follow a couple of guys that they run, so I'm like, dude, where's your next race? How far is it? And then I just start asking, where do you get your sups from? What do you take? And just then you're having a generic conversation and I just leave it. That's it.
Yeah.
And I just sit on it. And like, I just want to like have low level baseline conversations without going, you should be on my team, guy who has 300 people on his team somewhere else. Because then they're like, dude, this guy only is talking to me to recruit me. And it's very obvious when you do that. And I'm 100% certain that's happened to you. And it's probably awkward because it typically is. So that same thing can work through social media if you don't drown people in recruiting messages that are actually horrid.
Yeah, it's
This
just
is
it's just weird for everybody,
right. Yeah.
right? It's weird for
So
everyone, and then like too, like I said, if you're genuine, you actually care. I mean, I don't think I've ever not clicked on someone's profile that's probably commented on my post. So I mean, there's that for instance. I mean, yeah, I mean, so like everyone's gonna say, oh, okay, click on it. Oh, this dude does life insurance. Oh, what is it? Okay, he lifts. Oh, cool. Oh, wow. That deal paid what? Oh, what? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how to work. And obviously, too, if you're just consistent with that, there's real. You show kind of the daily routines, all that stuff. I mean, people are going to be ask questions, right?
the consistent discipline is huge and being interested. So I like that last year stuff. Anything else, dude, you want to drop some? That was some phenomenal closing knowledge. I don't know if we can get a whole lot better. So
Yeah, I would say no. I mean, really, just that. I mean, obviously, I'm pumped to be on the team, man. So like, we're going for this thing. Yeah, it's
yeah,
about
it's gonna get real wild around the Denver area here coming up soon. So I'm excited to watch what you guys do.
it. Okay.
All right, guys. Any last second stuff before we roll out of here?
I guess have one quick thing. So, Chris, are you just letting people, I mean, not weed themselves out, but kind of like once you have those conversations with the people, they're reaching out, they're saying, yeah, I want to get licensed, whatever. Like, what's kind of like your
What's the process of that?
not weed out process, but like, are you just letting them kind of weed themselves out?
No, 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 no. So okay, so obviously, like first and foremost, I think I would always kind of ask myself, like, what type of person do I really would want on my team? Obviously, I don't want just anybody. I want elite players. Obviously, like this is not just like some like I don't know, like some club, some like after school event. So, like, let's say, for example, let's say like you reached out to me, like, oh man, like that's crazy, like whatever, like, hey, is there any way that I could do this? Like, hey, well, honestly, like let's say it was yourself, Eric. I'd be like, honestly, Eric, I'm not really too sure, but here, why don't we jump on a quick call and just to see if it would be even a good fit. I get on a call, typically that range is about 10, 15 minutes. And really, it's kind of like in my head to kind of damn near scare these people not to do this. Like, hey, like, I'm not interested in you. You're interested in me. You're the guy who's reaching out to me. Like, listen, at the end of the day, it's going to take a lot of work. This is my trajectory. This is what I've done over the last 5 months. This is the money that I've made. This is like how it looks. This is what some people do in the office. But I'm always like, dude, like if you're not working 6 days a week, if you're not plugged in for our 8 a.m. and our 1 p.m. training, don't even show up. Like it's not even going to be an open conversation. From there, if I think someone's like relatively sharp and I'm like, you know what, like this, I think this is a good person, good gal, good guy, whatever, and I'd be like, hey, well, it's really not my decision to make. This is going to be ultimately Ty, so he's my like our office manager. So then I'll be like, hey, it's kind of up to him. So if he thinks you're a good fit, then that might be kind of the route we go. So from there, obviously I'll be like, hey, you have any questions, anything like that, anywhere I could help out? We'll say yes, no. I'll typically send them over like a YouTube video that one of our top guys, Jesse, did. And then from there, yeah, I mean, really, I pass that to Ty because, too, honestly, at the end of the day, like, I never want to be the guy who's like just trying to get a bunch of people. I think that's freaking weird. Like, I don't. I honestly, too, like, also, like, one thing I learned with hiring so many people, like, my first couple months, like, I probably shouldn't have hired, like, all the guys that fell off or whatever, like, we probably shouldn't have even given them. They probably shouldn't even made it through the door because obviously, like, the habits weren't there. I think the firmness up front of like, hey, dude, listen, if you're not working 6 days a week, you're not making minimum $300-400 a day, like, you're not going to have traction. Like, trying to like use that as like, hey, like, if you're not willing to do that, don't even show up. I mean, I would say that's how that works. It's just a quick call, almost like a screen call. If I, like them, or I think, they might be a good fit, send it to Ty. So if he thinks it's a good fit, then yeah, then we'll go. But if not, I mean, I just don't have like so much time either now. So, like, I'm pretty busy. So, too, I also want to be very selective of kind of who comes on. Yeah. I mean, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. I
Yeah, of
like
course.
the like screening YouTube video, passing to Ty.
Mhm.
I mean, have you ever? I mean, you'll just straight up tell him like, yeah, I don't think this is gonna work out for you, like in your screening call, in your pre-screening call.
I mean,
Like,
if it's like bad, which I've really only had maybe like one or two bad screens, I'll just go like, hey, like, honestly, John, I just don't think this would be a good fit, man. Like, based off of what you're telling me, like, it's just probably not going to work out.
okay,
I'll just be very upfront with that. Just because, like, dude, I just don't have time to waste. Like, shit, like, I'm trying to sell, train,
yeah, yeah, it's a
develop all
lot.
that stuff. Like, I'm not just going to do that for anybody. Like, I personally, like, yeah, I'll give anybody that opportunity, that ability to, but yeah, I just can't, like, from a time perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Man, Chris,
Yes, sir.
you only doing warm market and like social media, or are you doing Indeed and whatnot as well for
I've
hiring?
only, I've only done warm market, Too, I think that also kind of comes back with like, everybody knows that I sell insurance. Everybody knows what I do. Obviously, I'm very, very just open with all of it. I'm super, filleted, if you will. So, too, I mean, even like last week, I think was a really good example of two people that I personally don't even know, like, that reached out to me, just random text messages like, hey, man, like, I heard you do insurance, blah, blah. Is there any way that, I heard that I might be able to get like an opportunity? And I'm like, shoot, man. Well, like, that was from other people that like referenced those guys to me. So I'm like, man, like, these guys don't even work in the office, but they know what I'm doing. And then obviously they see the results. So then, too, like, those people are now reaching out to me. I think that's pretty neat. So it's strictly been warm market. I think eventually Indeed would probably be pretty good. But, too, I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? I think, like I said, I think we've got, yes. Yeah. I mean, the team's like, building pretty dang good right now. So I'm not going to mess with anything. But Indeed, I guess, yeah, I definitely would be willing to, or any like cold market stuff. But yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
You?
Well, dude, that's freaking awesome. Like I said, dude, really excited to be around you guys and watch what you guys are going to do the next 12 months. Pumped for the event coming up. Quick reminder, December 19th. Chris will be there and he will be training.
Sure.
So we can have a special Chris meet and greet if you guys want. I'm totally in. But yeah, I'm pumped to see everybody that can make it. And then thanks for your time. I'm gonna get this blasted up to YouTube. And
Thanks, Chris.
if you guys
Yes,
have
sir.
questions, Chris would be more than happy to help you. So, all right, guys, I will see you next Monday.